another episode of the Square and Compass podcast. Uh, this week, I'm excited because we're talking about something, or I've got a guest, and this is something I know very little about. So I'm excited to learn more about it. Jennifer Stowe, past Grand Standard bearer, and the unofficial, I'll say, historian, or certainly the person who knows a lot of the history of the Order of Women Freemasons, which is something I think even a lot of Masons, but even non-Masons, know very little about. And I'm looking forward to learning more about it. I learned, for example, that it has a pretty significant history in Canada dating to 1954, but it goes back a lot further in England.
Yes.
But before that, I even want to say, I had a chance to meet you at Hamilton at the Day of Masonry. What was that like for you? I had a great time. How did you find the Day of Masonry in Hamilton?
I enjoyed it. I felt that there was something going on at all times. I felt that all the participants and attendees were engaging and very interested, and they just seemed passionate and wanted to be there, which is great. That's great for Masonry in general. And certainly, the members of my order who attended were very, very pleased to be there, whether we were there on a capacity of hosting a booth, or just coming to check it out and enjoy. We enjoyed ourselves very much, and I felt that it was a very successful day. Particularly for the the Masons in Ontario, and for your order in particular. It was very well done and very well organized. I think things went like clockwork, and you should be very pat yourselves on the back because you did a great job.
How did the invitation come about for you for the Order of Women Freemasons um, to take part in a Day of Masonry?
Well, I didn't receive the invitation directly. It was our Grand Inspector here in Canada, who is kind of like, we don't have in our order the office of, or the rank of District Deputy Grand Master, but it's sort of like that because a Grand Inspector is in charge of a district of their own, so the lodges within that district. And here in Canada, we're an overseas district, because our Grand Lodge, of course, is located in London, England. And so our Grand Inspector here, she was contacted about participating. And, we have, for many, many, many years, have, been informally in contact with your Grand Lodge. And, whether it's on a social basis or just, Masons tend to know Masons, and certainly we have some members who may be married to a male Mason, here in Ontario. And, you just, some get to know each other. And so I think more and more over the years that as awareness raises, we just, our ties are getting a little bit stronger. And, so I don't know who contacted our Grand Inspector, Very Worshipful Brother Caldwell, but I they got in touch and invited us to attend, and we were very happy to do so.
And I thought it was great to see you there as well as everybody who was there, and I would echo your sentiments. It was just a very well organized, very, very fun event, and it was great having you there. There was um, Prince Hall was there, Masonic Education Foundation, or College of Freemasonry. So it was a really Masonic chip program. It was a really awesome day. And I'm hoping they'll do it again next year, or I think they're looking at doing it in a few different locations across the province. And I'm hoping to see you guys again. But let's start. I suppose we should start at the start. What is the Order of Women Freemasons?
Well, we're a fraternal order, and I say that we do call each other brother, in the sense of the brotherhood of mankind. Um, so we stick to that. Um, we were founded in 1908. Originally, when we were first founded, we were an English co-Masonic order. And so our first Grand Master was a gentleman named Reverend Dr. William Cobb. And he was Grand Master for 4 years. And after that, all of our Grand Masters have been women. Of course, in 1908, the suffrage movement was gaining strength, and that was something that was important to some male Masons in the United Grand Lodge of England. And between them and some other women who were also Masons, some of them were Masons over in the Droit Humain in France, but they were English brethren. They decided that they wanted to have an English Grand Lodge, and they didn't want to work it in the French obedience. They wanted it to be a proper English tradition. So moving away from the accepted rite and going into the York rite. So they formed a Grand Lodge, and after sometime in the 1920s, there was some communications back and forth between the Order of Women Freemasons. Their actual title, their formal title, is the Honorable Fraternity of Ancient Masonry. And we subtitled it the Order of Women Freemasons in 1935, I believe it was. 1958. But in 1935, we became a strictly women only. But sometime in the 1920s, it was decided it would be women only because there was, leading up to that period, there was a little bit of friction between our order and the United Grand Lodge of England, because some of their members weren't very happy that there was women who were fraternizing with the gentlemen who were also members of our order and their order. And it just kind of became a bit complicated. We had early on had sent in a letter requesting, our Grand Master had sent in a letter requesting that we have mutual recognition, and that was denied based on the fact that we had women in the order. So combine that with the suffrage movement, members of the order at the time just decided that we would restrict membership by the male Masons, and we would retain the ones that we had, but as they, died off and through attrition, that we would just morph into women only, and that's what we did. And by 1935, we were 100% women only. So, and then from then on there, we've just been operating. We operate along the same lines as the United Grand Lodge of England. We use the same rituals, and we just basically, we have almost the same structure. Of course, they're enormous. We're not enormous like they are. They have lodges in the thousands. We have lodges in the hundreds, and but we are pretty much the same as them in terms of structure and our ritual and how we conduct operations, I guess. So yeah, so that's kind of what happened. I'm really summarizing it. It was quite a complex evolution, but I don't want to bore you with all the details.
I mean, I think history is usually pretty complex, right? There's very little simple when you actually start to delve into it.
Yeah, well, with all social issues, you look at the times of when all of this happened, and it really does reflect the issues within society at the time.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's true for just Freemasonry. Well, that's true for anything, I suppose, but it's very hard. I think sometimes people, including Masons, whether whatever the order, have a tendency to to try to imagine Freemasonry as being separate from the world or separate from the times in which it exists. But whatever issues were facing the world at large outside of a lodge would find their way into a lodge at some point. I mean, that's just human
Yeah.
nature.
Yeah.
You know, in terms of the Canadian side of it all, what was the path
How,
by which it came to Canada in
how we ended up
1954?
here.
Yeah.
Well, the Order of Women Freemasons has lodges in various countries. We and then that's changed over time. But we've had lodges in Canada since 1954. What happened was our actually most senior member over here in Canada. Her name is Right Worshipful Brother Boersma. She's a past Grand Junior Warden. She was in it from. She was a founding member of all of the lodges here, and all of the information that we've really gleaned is from her because she's been around since the beginning. She What happened was there was some ladies who became members of the order over here in Toronto, and they had one had a relative over in the UK who was a member of the order over there. And she came over here, and at the time there was traveling back and forth, and she suggested, oh, you would maybe enjoy this. And so there was interest, and at the time communities were much tighter and closer and not so spread apart like we are now. And so in in the Toronto area there were various ladies who they knew each other, and they expressed a serious interest in joining the order and becoming Freemasons. So because the one had a relations over who was a member of the order, communications with Grand Lodge were had, and to make a long story short, a petition was signed with enough potential members. So they came over, and a lodge was consecrated, and it went from there. And Right Worshipful Brother Boersma was one of those members who was initiated and made a member, and she's remained ever since. Next year she will have been in the order for 70 years.
Uh, before I talk about the current status and present, I'm curious, what type of milestones does the OWF celebrate? You mentioned 70 years. I mean, in on our side of the world, there's 25-year pins, there's 50-year pins.
Mm-hmm.
I believe there's a 60-year, and I think there's even a 70-year. Um, is that the same on your side? I'm just curious about that. When you mentioned 70 years a member, what type of
Recognition.
ceremonies or recognition? There we go. That's the word. What type
Yeah.
of recognition is there for those milestones?
Yeah. Well, our Grand Master, we apply for, and our Grand Master signs a certificate of recognition and of a member's 25-year mark, a 50-year mark. And then after that, of course, well, actually more and more nowadays, since we're all living longer, it used to be that there weren't too many who would be past that 50-year mark, but now we're seeing the 60-year marks, and in fewer cases, but certainly increasing cases, a 70-year mark, even like I just mentioned. So the Grand Lodge, our Grand Master, will have a certificate issued, which she will sign, and they don't at the Grand Lodge level send out a pin. However, that's up to the lodge itself. Their I guess their mother lodge, or whatever lodge is their craft lodge, that is their main lodge that they attend at the time. So, for instance, at my mother lodge, we I'm the secretary there, and I procure 25-year pins and 50-year pins and 60-year pins, and I'll have to get a 70-year pin, I guess. So, so and then we'll have our worshipful master at the time will make a presentation during a regular lodge meeting, and we'll have a little celebration for that individual.
Well, first, my condolences to you. I am also a secretary,
Yeah,
so I
yeah.
know I know your
It's a lot
pain.
of work. It's a
It
lot of
is
work.
a lot of work,
I
and you're
enjoy
never,
it though. I enjoy it.
wow,
I really do, but it is sometimes I kind of feel like whatever jobs that no one else wants to do, that it gets kind of dumped on the secretary sometimes.
I would agree with that. I'm much less upbeat about it than you are, but I'm glad you enjoy being secretary anyways. No, it's
I
all right.
do.
It's got its good moments.
Yeah.
Certainly it's the most it's I would say it's the most that and the treasurer. I'm assuming it's the same thing with OWF. It's the most like it has a very high floor, right? Is how I describe it. Like there are other offices where, if you want to, you can do a lot, and but the minimum requirements are relatively low, right? If all you want to do is show up and not really be active, that's okay in some offices. Whereas with secretary and treasurer, there's very specific rules set out as to what has to be done and when it has to be done, and
Yeah.
there are those requirements that don't necessarily exist in other offices. So I would say it has the highest
Mm.
floor, where there are things
Yeah.
you have to do, or else Grand Lodge starts to sniff around and ask questions.
Yeah, it also cripples a lodge if you have an ineffective secretary or treasurer. I mean, obviously, when it comes to treasurer, money it's everybody's money, so you want the the best person for the job for that, and hopefully that's someone who has some solid experience with whether it's an accounting background or some kind of um ability to take care of that and ensure that those funds are safe and well managed. Um, but and so if you don't have that, a lodge is really in trouble. And then the same thing with a secretary, really. I mean, it might not be money, but the management of the administration, and yeah, and making sure that all those boxes are ticked, and also just dealing with the members. I mean, you have to be a good and effective secretary, you have to have quite a bit of knowledge and the ability to um, retain that knowledge and use it effectively, use it as well. So yeah, I think a lodge is really crippled if they don't have a qualified secretary or treasurer. And of course, it's really nice if they can stay in that position for a long time so that they can gain that experience and share it, for the benefit of the brethren.
You know, I want to go back to what you talked about on the recognition side of it and the pins, and you mentioned people living longer. Uh, I always think back to, I think it was 2 years ago. I was something like that. I was in, I don't even remember, Missouri. There was the Missouri Grand Lodge Communication, and the Grand Master, during his address, held up a coin, and it was 100-year service coin. And I remember he said, with uh, life expectancy as compared to decades, centuries of the past, he said it's not impossible to imagine that within our lifetime we'll be giving 100-year service coin to a brother. I mean, in the States, you can join at the age of 19. So 119, it's not out of the realm of possibility at some point based on the way things are
Yeah,
going.
yeah, one of our members, one of our longtime members, her mother is not a member, but her mother is, gosh, I think she's going to be turning, I think, 114 this year. Like, and it's just incredible. And she's still, I mean, her health is starting to fail more, but she's got it all up there. Really, really really smart woman and very active and vital. And it's just incredible to see that. I mean, there was a time where we just never could have imagined. So I kind of agree that it could be going that way. Um, it could be. It'll be really
Meanwhile,
interesting.
I sneeze too hard and my back hurts, but
I
there are
know.
people out there making it to 114.
Yeah.
So I don't know to what extent you can speak about the Canadian OWF experience, but Ontario wise, I understand currently there are 4 lodges.
There's 4 craft lodges, yes, in Ontario. All kind of mostly in the GTA. There's one that is which was our first lodge that was consecrated in 1954. They meet in Scarborough, and there's another lodge that meets in Port Credit in Mississauga, and at
At the
the
Sonic
Mississauga
Temple there.
Masonic Temple. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And we've been meeting there for a long time. That's the lodge that's my mother lodge, and that's the lodge that I'm the secretary of. And then there's another lodge that meets at the Oshawa Masonic Temple. And then the last one is a fairly new lodge that was just consecrated in 2018, and they meet in St. Catharines.
And can you speak at all to uh, OWF in Canada? Do you know roughly how many lodges there are in the country? Are they all primarily in Ontario?
That's it right now. Well, we have a higher degree lodge, and then we have installed master's lodges in our order, which I know that you don't have in your order, at least not in the same way that we do. Our structure is a bit different in terms of degrees than the the men in Ontario that they have, because we're in English obedience. So if you know the structure of the degrees in United Grand Lodge of England and their Grand Lodge of Archmaster Masons, etc., ours is like that. So we have an installed Masters Lodge, which is an extension of the Board of Installed Masters at an installation meeting in Craft. It's its own lodge. We don't conduct degrees are not conferred in that lodge, but we do have a ceremony that that expands on the inner workings for an installed master. So that's a lodge on its own. Those lodges are primarily kind of like more like research lodges. It's supposed to be for Masonic education for past masters. We also here have a Mark Master Masons Lodge, and so we're conducting the Mark Master Mason degree at that lodge. It used to be in the past that we also had a Royal Ark Mariner anchored to our Mark Master Mason Lodge, and we also had a Royal Arch chapter. However, those last two, well, actually, all three of those went dark in the 80s due to declining membership. Just kind of overall, the 70s and 80s were not a great time for Masonry in terms of membership because of the ebb and flow of interest. And so baby boomers weren't all that interested overall in being Masons like their parents' generation were. So of course we see that up and down over time. And also, the economic times, the 70s with the recessions, and then of course there came that boom time in the 80s. But so things eventually picked up in the 90s again. But so some of the lodges went dark, including some of our craft lodges. We actually had more craft lodges here and in British Columbia as well. And those kind of all went dark at that time due to the societal and economic circumstances. And but we did get our Mark Lodge back in 2011. Some of our brethren over here, we worked very hard. We got our Mark Lodge back, and we're we've been working on getting our other higher degrees back. So those are the lodges that we have currently. We just don't have because we have such a low profile, uh, certainly over here in Canada, and and in North America, even the profile of our order is there's so much a lack of awareness that we even exist, and yet here we've been around for over 100 years as an order, and in Canada since 1954. So next year it'll be 70 years. But that profile's raising. I think with a younger generation overall coming into Masonry, or younger generations, um, you know, they're more interested in being global. They're more interested in women, the idea of women as being Masons, and more accepting of it. And so we're seeing a lot more just interest, acceptance. That's neither here nor there. I mean, that's nice, but that doesn't really matter. But interest and cooperation is wonderful, and we're seeing more and more of that. So the awareness is starting to raise, and I think we're going to see that a lot more over the next 20 years, a lot more.
Well, that
That was a long-winded answer, sorry.
but no, you mentioned 20 years. I think that that's a good jumping off point. This is a question I've asked. I try to ask regularly, especially when I'm speaking to Masons. Um, when you look to the future, 20 years down the road, 30 years, whatever the number will be, what most excites you about the future for OWF or even Masonry in general, but also what most concerns you, or where do you see struggles in the next 20 years for either OWF, or because you know a lot about Masonry as well, right? So just the idea of Masonry in general as an order, what most excites you and what most concerns you?
Well, I mean, I think I don't want to speak. It's hard because being here in Canada, I'm a member of higher degrees over in the UK, like beyond. I mean, here in Canada right now, we're only doing as much as the Mark Master Mason's degree. But over in the UK, our order works all of the degrees in the UK. So over there, I travel over there to go do those degrees. So I don't want to speak too much for what their experience is, even though, I do have a tad of that experience. I can more speak to what our experience here is in Canada as an overseas district. But I think, let me start with the challenges first, because I'd rather kind of go into that and then come out at the end with a light at the end of the tunnel. Um, I think that our challenges are that we are, of course, we have already gone into a recession period, and as we know that um, being a Mason means largely it involves money because we have to pay these memberships. It costs money to have that privilege of participating, whether it's a little bit of money or a lot of money, depends on what you're doing. But I think that I all Masonic orders and organizations see a dip when economic times are not bountiful. So, we'll see our membership dip there. And I think that's a challenge. And I think that's a challenge that we're going to see for some time to come. Also, of course, right now, we've just coming out and still really, we're only really at the beginning of seeing the negative after effects of having all of the closures due to the COVID closures and such. So as far as I know with our order, and as far as I think that to my understanding, that other Masonic orders, such as yours and other ones, seeing some lodges are struggling a bit with membership because coming out of it, losing some members for one reason or another, whether it's maybe you get a few who aren't comfortable coming back. Maybe you get some who just no longer afford it because they were so severely impacted by the rise in the cost of living, or maybe their own financial circumstances due to the closures and such, and just the negative effects to business in general. And then there another group who just have found that having a 2 or 2.5, even in some cases 3-year absence from lodge, they've decided that they just don't need, they don't have the time for that in their life anymore, or they just have lost interest, whatever the case may be. All those little drips come in, and I think that they've impacted our membership in my order, in your order, and in many Masonic organizations. And I think that'll go on for a while. However, I think so. I think that's a big challenge. Also, another challenge is the generational changes, but that's also going to be a blessing too. But I think the challenges for the generations are, we are seeing there's a huge issue of reliance on the older generation, which has become the baby boomer generation now, largely. And they're starting to die off. And so that means a huge drop in numbers for everybody. Just like we're going to see a huge population drop, over the next 20 years, we'll say 20 years, it's going to, because they're going to go from being, say, 70 to 90. We're going to see them. We're already starting to see that generation, feel its mortality. Well, when you look at the membership rosters of most lodges, there's probably at least half that are of that cohort. So that's going to really, really impact the Masonic organizations. However, so getting the younger generation, younger being, I'm a Gen Xer, so anything my age and younger is great because we have some longevity built in. Plus, add in the fact of as we were talking about earlier, living longer. We have the potential to live a heck of a lot longer than our predecessors. So really the future is with us. And actually, I was very pleased when at that day of Masonry, when your Grand Master included that within his speech that he gave. That was very interesting, and it certainly echoed some of the thoughts that I have been forming. And so I think that the future, once we can get over this hump of a huge drop in membership and the challenges of the other challenges of losing membership that I mentioned, I think we're going to be just fine. Because, and I agree with your Grandmaster, focusing on quality and not quantity is, I think, it's always the solution. But I think that will be the solution to be successful, because quality attracts everyone. Who doesn't want quality? And I think that you need to set the bar that you want going forward. And so this is an opportunity. We may have this huge challenge now and ahead of us for a while, for quite a few years, but it's an opportunity for all Masonic organizations to pare down, up that bar, and be solid going into the future. Because there'll be a time where as I said, the ebb and flow where membership will shoot up again. And that's a tool that we can use to make that happen sooner and to improve ourselves as organizations, hopefully in the long term. Um, that's what I'd like to see. That's what I think is the answer. And, I think that that's the promise as Masons, the good, the wonderful, positive promise that we have to look forward to.
I'm curious. This is something I don't really have any experience with, though in Masonic history it was the norm. It's really been the exception only more recently. But being chartered overseas, I'm guessing at this point in 2023, you got email, you've got Zoom, you've got all these things. It really doesn't make a difference. But what is the communication like between lodges in OWF lodges in Canada and the Grand Lodge in London? Correct? It's in London.
Yeah, it's in London, in the city, right in the city.
Yeah. So
Um,
what's the communication like? What's it like being chartered overseas? And you mentioned before you are a member of some orders, some higher
higher degrees.
lodges, higher degrees in overseas in
Yeah.
United Kingdom. How often do you get a chance to take part in those, and what's that like?
It's dependent on obviously when I can travel, whether it be time or money. So, that's not very often, but I have tried to go as often as I can. And I certainly, I mean, um, well, we'll go back to communication between our Grand Lodge in London and our lodges here. Well, we have, as I mentioned earlier, we have our Grand Inspector, who is sort of like the equivalent to your DDGM, and she oversees our lodges here. She represents the Grand Master, and um, you know, reports to Grand Lodge about us. Obviously, the secretaries and the treasurers in contact with Grand Lodge for administrative issues and regular duties. So it's just normal, really. I think the only the where it's difficult is that we don't have the we don't have access, and very frequent access anyway, to that a lodge that's over in the United Kingdom would have, to the wealth of what a Grand Lodge has to offer in terms of education and support, like direct support, meaning all their active Grand Lodge officers, their reigning Grand Lodge officers, are going to be out and about in the lodges, and helping with maybe ceremonial work and education, making sure that the lodges are conducting their ceremonies um, as is expected, and such, and just providing that kind of support. We have a library at our Grand Lodge, at our HQ, our administrative building. Well, obviously, as in an overseas district, we can't access that unless we go over there. So there's some downsides, but that's okay. I mean, we've managed thus far, so I guess it's not all that bad, is it? Um, we don't often get to see our reigning Grand Lodge officers, in terms of, say, the Grand Master, whereas the Brethren in the UK would get to interact with our Grand Master, our Deputy and Assistant Grand Masters, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, on a face-to-face basis, because they would be out and about in the lodges conducting official visitations and such, whereas we don't get that very often. We were really pleased in 2018. Our Grand Master and Grand Director of Ceremonies came over because we were having a lodge consecrated. They both traveled over along with another Grand Lodge officer to conduct that and consecrate, and they were here for about 2.5 weeks, and we were very, very busy, and we were thrilled that they were here. So that was an honor for us. So we definitely take advantage when we have that direct access, but that's a challenge for us. So that's, I guess that's, I don't know what else to say about how our connection and interaction with our Grand Lodges. It's pretty normal, just with the exception is that we don't have that direct access nearly as much as what our brethren in the United Kingdom have. Now, okay, I'm forgetting what the other part of the question was because I was so
No,
long-winded about that.
I mean that really was the question, right? It's that being a overseas charter and
Mm-hmm.
what that means in terms of the communication between yourself and or your lodges, I should say, and Grand Lodge. I did point out, in 2023, that's very different. The norm, I mean, obviously, Freemasonry beginning in London in 1717, the vast majority of lodges internationally were chartered out of England. But
Oh,
back
yeah,
then,
absolutely. Yeah,
you know, you're
they're the mother of us all, really.
and back then you're sending your correspondence to Grand Lodge from Canada, say you're sending it through postage on a boat that could get there 6 months down the line.
Yeah.
There was no email, there was no Zoom.
Yeah.
So
It was a
even
big venture. It was to me it's amazing that the when our first lodge was consecrated here in Toronto back in the 50s, it's amazing to me that they did what they did. They traveled by plane and boat over from the UK to consecrate this lodge, and even when lodges were consecrated out in British Columbia at the time, our members here who were assisting in that had to take trains out there because they had all of the lodge furniture and regalia that they had to bring in trunks and such by themselves. It was a huge venture, and they had to go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and they'd have to travel out to interview potential members. You couldn't just do it over the phone or by Zoom. It was just an amazing feat, I think. I think now it's so much easier for us all. One thing that having all of the closures and having the internet and having Zoom and all of the privileges that we as individuals in society have now as Freemasons which helped to bring us all closer together as differing Masonic organizations, is being able to have a Zoom meeting and to have webcasts and podcasts and such. Yeah, I guess in a way, the pandemic brought us all closer together in that respect, even though we were all isolated, and all of the closures, which caused some devastating effects. Um, that's a really positive variable that came out of it, is that we're all in closer connection to each other. With the Zoom meetings, there's for instance, the Freemasons Without Borders Zoom meetings that were, hosted out of the UK, but it was internationally. So you had Masons, both male and female, who were attending for Masonic education from all over the world, and it was really quite amazing. And there was lots of those sorts of Zoom meetings, including Zoom meetings with brethren in your order who, we were invited to educational meetings. So, just kind of skipping back to what we were talking about a little while ago, it there that's another positive that's we can look forward more to.
I think limitations are usually a good thing in that they force creativity and they force thinking outside the box. Necessity is the mother of invention, I think
Yeah,
is the phrase, right?
yeah.
For
I
it,
think you
it's
can't get any more tenacious people than Masons. Masons are like die hard, we're not giving up people.
we'll find a way, we'll find a way.
Yeah,
It's unfortunate the way it happened because obviously there was so much collateral damage and people's deaths and that's all. Um, but if there was a silver lining to the terrible time that was related to the COVID shutdowns and the lockdowns, I think, at least for Masonically speaking, that silver lining was it really forced Freemasonry to think outside the box and to try things that really were on. I mean, Zoom wasn't new; it had been around for a while.
yeah,
Or in Ontario, go-to meeting, or the idea of having a virtual get together, or a more heavy reliance on technological infrastructure. All that stuff was there. It just nothing had forced the hand of anybody.
yeah,
And I think you saw, at least for me, as I was secretary during the pandemic, I still am, and virtual meetings provided, and I still try to hold them regularly. They provided a great opportunity to include brothers who had moved away from the jurisdiction, so they weren't able to
yeah,
meet in person because it would be too expensive or too long to travel to a lodge. They could visit us virtually.
yeah,
You could bring in guest speakers at a much cheaper rate, that maybe even for free, but you don't have to worry about paying for anybody's travel or anybody's accommodation. They could just click a link and hit the Zoom button. And
yeah,
I've said this before. I've been a Mason since 2007. The smartest decision I think the Ontario Grand Lodge made, my Ontario Grand Lodge made, was keeping the virtual meetings um, not tiled, keeping them open. So we didn't do ritual, but that meant we could bring in guest speakers, we could bring in candidates,
yeah,
applicants, people interested in the craft. I know that other jurisdictions decided to have actual tiled meetings and perform ritual virtually, and I did attend some of those, like in California, virtually, and but I was very happy with, and not to pat myself on the back, but I will. I was very happy with the way my lodge, Harmony, but also a lot of lodges took to the virtual realm to try to strengthen the craft during the very challenging time that was COVID. And I do think that it showed there is a place for it in the order.
yeah, yeah. And I didn't experience any tiled meetings, so that's interesting that you attended some. But I attended quite a few of the just kind of more educational or even social meetings um, and I think some of those have dropped off since we've been back into the lodge room, but I'm also seeing some, a small handful that are continuing, whether it's at the local level or the international level, and certainly, um, you know, I think that Freemasons can be a little or as organizations, not necessarily as individuals, can be a little slow embracing um, modern, whether it's technology or
I would use the phrase
methods.
myopic perhaps sometimes.
I mean, look at podcasts. Podcasts have been around at least since the early 2000s, and yet there's still many members and people even who, even though it's very popular now, who still don't know what's a podcast? How do I listen to a podcast? Of course it's more like, getting to be the little bit older generation, older than my generation, but it's new to them. And I think that um it was very beneficial that during the closures, that having these various Zoom meetings and webcasts and such have opened it up into acceptance for Masons more in a widespread way, whereas before they just weren't even aware.
I agree, and I think that my hope is that the virtual side of it doesn't go away. Even at the lodge level, lodges will try to continue with the virtual meetings because they are a wonderful tool that it's like everything. A few people have asked me whether or not I'm supportive of Freemasonry in the virtual space. And I always say, well, it's like anything else. It's like, what is the problem we're trying to address? It's the tool, right? So
Yeah.
if you were to say to me, am I in favor of a hammer? It's like, well, is there a nail in front of me? There's there a screw in front of me. And when it comes to the virtual meetings, what problem are you trying to address? Well, I think virtual meetings provide a great opportunity to bring in brothers who have traveled and are not able to visit in person due to time, money, whatever. They
Yeah.
also provide a great opportunity for guest speakers at a much cheaper rate.
Yeah.
Um, and for visitors from other jurisdictions to come in and say hi. And even they
Yeah.
make a great another opportunity for candidates to meet more people. So it's just it's a tool and it's there, and I hope we don't, now that we're meeting in person, which is obviously what we all want and that's the goal.
Hmm.
I hope we don't forget about it though, because there's some value there.
I don't think, as I was saying, I think that I think, quite a few of them have dropped off because maybe they don't feel there's the need, but I think there's still that handful that are continuing on. And I certainly think that podcasts in particular are going to retain their not viewership but listenership, um, because I think it's a heck of a lot easier to, you can listen to a podcast while you're driving. You can't watch, attend or watch a Zoom meeting or watch a video, maybe a YouTube video while you're driving, or, or while you're, it's not so easy, but listening to something is easily accessible. So I think that in terms of podcasts, we're going to see that's not going to drop off nearly as much. That's going to pretty much keep the interest. I think it's going to hold. In fact, I think it's even going to get more and more interest because, as I said, the um, with the generations who are mainly listening to podcasts, they're just getting bigger and bigger. So
And
you're
and
onto a
with
good
that,
thing.
everybody please like and subscribe to this podcast and leave a comment and all the things you're supposed to say. I am going to leave some links in the description for this video, whether you're listening to this through audio or if you're on YouTube. But before we finish, best place for people if they are interested in learning more about OWF, Order of Women Freemasons. What's the best place for them to find that information?
Well, probably our website is the best introduction, which is owf.org.uk, or you could just, do a search for the Order of Women Freemasons. Um, and we do have a Twitter feed. It's at Order Women. And we have an Instagram too, although I can't remember offhand because I don't really look at Instagram very much. So, but those are the main two. You can access the others through there. Um, our website has, the typical information for the public, news about what we're up to, and and information on about Freemasonry in general, and if anyone's interested in being a member, any female, of course, in this circumstance, and uh, that's really the best way. And if there is any women in Canada, who are interested in becoming members, they can, whatever inquiry that they have from anywhere in the world, really, if anyone is interested and they put an inquiry in through the website, it gets sent over to us if it's within our area. So we will get it. it might just take a little bit of time. So there's no need necessarily to contact our members here in Canada directly. Sometimes it's easier just to go through the Grand Lodge through the website, and they'll refer it over.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast. It was great meeting you in Hamilton. I hope to see you at other events, because I know that our Grand Lodge is really pushing more of these A Day of Masonry style events and open houses. And
I'm
it was
very glad
awesome
about that.
seeing you. Me too. Me too. And it was great seeing you in Hamilton, and I hope to see you again in person. But it was great seeing you again through the computer screen. Thank you so much.
Well, it was very much my pleasure to be invited. So thank you, Cameron.